Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, October 14th, what some of us still call Columbus Day, particularly now that we have discovered that Christopher Columbus was a Sephardic Jew, which we can talk about a little later, all the manifold ironies that come into that. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Yes, DNA testing suggests that Cristobal Colon, Christopher Columbus, as has often been speculated, or certainly in my lifetime has been speculated, was of Sephardic Jewish origin. There appears to be genetic confirmation of this fact, which comes at an interesting time because, of course, Christopher Columbus is in certain circles as unpopular as Jewish people are in those very same circles. And so welcome to the tribe, Christopher Columbus. You come in good time. You have arrived just in time to be part of the settler colonial movement. And of course, the word colonial itself derives from Christopher Columbus's name, which is Colon in the original. So, do we have anything to add to this except that Jews are awesome? We're awesome. I'm sorry.
We're always talking about how Jews and Italians are so similar. And, now we understand that we're even more intertwined than even the joke about food and family and all the other stuff.
Isn't it a confirmation of Krauthammer's law that everyone is Jewish until proven otherwise?
That's also my father's law. My father's law got more specific, which is that every Hungarian is Jewish. That was his. Every Hungarian he ever met. Once you dug in, I don't think current Hungarians. I don't think the sort of Orban government Hungarians, but every Hungarian you ever met in the West who said that they were Hungarian just dug a little deeper. And there was Jewish blood there. So I am just going to add that I am delighted to welcome Christopher Columbus into the fold. He was one of the signature figures in changing the world, and I will argue, would be very happy to argue for immensely for the better and the salvation rather than the immiseration of the peoples of the New World. But still, I think it comes at an interesting time because, of course, this is also Indigenous Peoples Day.
I was going to say, I just checked Kamala Harris's Twitter feed, and she has not acknowledged the day in either of its guises. In the years past, I've been told she celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day. But so far, at 10:05 Eastern Time, she is not celebrating any day.
Didn't Biden acknowledge both?
He has acknowledged both, yes, and proclamations.
So he's celebrating both, and she's celebrating neither.
Now, it is a politically interesting history, Columbus Day. Columbus Day has a politically interesting history because it was arguably the first ethnic. It was arguably the first moment at which ethnic politics began to play a central role in American life, because Columbus Day is not a day to celebrate Christopher Columbus. It is a day to celebrate Italian Americans. And when it arose in the 1890s, it arose because politicians in eastern cities that had large Italian populations were courting Italian votes. And so it was also the 400th anniversary. Is that right? In 1892 was the 400th anniversary, of course, of Columbus's arrival in the New World. The 1893 World's Fair was kind of dedicated to the issue, the Columbus Exposition. But when Columbus Day began to be celebrated, it was celebrated as a means of celebrating this new arrival to the United States, politically potent, large in number, and very important in cities like New York and Boston to the electoral fortunes of local politicians. And so what we have here is a kind of change, 100-year change or 125-year change in the way we view ethnic politics in the United States, which is that Italians are no longer viewed as some kind of a separate ethnicity requiring courtship. Rather, they can be taken for granted They can be made fun of. You can make movies about how they are all criminals. You can make movies about how they all eat pasta and they have Prince Spaghetti Day. And you can do all kinds of stuff with Italians without any fear of reprisal. But if you live in America in 2024 and you live in certain liberal circles, any piece of property in America now must be attended with a land acknowledgement that explains how that piece of property was somehow stolen from a Native American tribe, most Native American tribes not having any particular notion of private property ownership. Might be surprised if they were to get in a time machine and travel forward to the very notion they had something that was expropriated from them, since they were nomadic.
Just wait until DNA tests confirm that the Native Americans were Jews.
Well, then the Mormon Church will have
that'll be the big news.
That is actually the moment at which the divinity or the deliverance of the Mormon Church will be demonstrated. So, which is part of the Mormon theology.
I have a point to make about Columbus Day. It's about whether you think America is worth celebrating or not. Do you think the discovery of America is a triumph and that it led to the greatest expansion in human liberty and human progress in the history of this species, Homo sapiens? Or do you think it's something that was a crime and disgusting and genocidal? And if you celebrate America, you're going to celebrate Christopher Columbus. You're going to acknowledge he had his faults. It was not one, upward ascent.
Nobody's perfect.
But the consequence of the discovery of America has got to be good. It was good. It was great. It was amazing. And the other approach, the guilt-ridden, woe is us, everything is awful, let's hate our history, is unfortunately ascendant in our culture. There was an essay in the Atlantic today by Beverly Gage, a historian at Yale, reminding people that the 250th anniversary of the United States is upon us in a couple of years. And she points out that the left is completely ignoring it. The left has nothing to say. The left is ashamed. It doesn't know how to celebrate this country, this amazing, wonderful country.
Now, interestingly enough, of course, what we get when people on the left run for office and face the voters is you suddenly get an infusion.
Right. Well, as the Times tells us, Kamala Harris is the only patriotic choice.
Well, she loves this country. I know that because she says it. If you say to her, what's your policy on Tanganyika? She says, well, I love this country.
Well, but no, first she says, I was born in a middle-class family.
And I had a second mother, and I had a second mother, and all of that. So, but it is true that the rediscovery of patriotism does seem to happen
every 4 years.
Quadrennial, yes. It's like the Defense Review. There is the rediscovery,
the China Commission, the Defense Review, and the rediscovery of patriotism every 4 years.
Exactly. Okay, so what is this? It tells us very little, but it does move us into the discussion of Kamala Harris and the fact that it now seems pretty evident that her 3-month climb to the summit has stalled, at K2. She polling over the weekend and across last week we missed because we were off. Showing again the races in the battleground states are the closest that any races have ever been in any circumstance. 7 states in which the margin separating the candidates is less than a point. And polling yesterday that seems to suggest, at least the NBC poll, which is the most interesting, I think, has a tied race at 48, with the most salient fact being that this race is not about race, and it's not about democracy, and it's not about what other. It's not about the Middle East. It's not about. It is that men prefer Trump, 56-41, and women prefer Harris, 56-41. And that is the race. The race is, if you look at those numbers and you say, why is this race tied? It is because the gender gap is almost exactly, it's startling how.
Well, if anything, it favors Trump,
yes,
because Trump is winning among men slightly more than Harris is winning among women.
Right. But again, within, I don't know exactly how you say margin of error when you get to these subpopulations, but yes, well, there all sorts of things seem to favor Trump in these calculations, which is that you have these likely voter screens. The NBC poll that I'm talking about, which came out yesterday, dispenses with the likely voter screen, which was an important structural decision that NBC made on the, I think, very sound grounds that nobody has any idea what the composition of this electorate in November is going to be, and that therefore trying to create some idea of that body of voters, including, by the way, the number of voters, because there are all sorts of evident indications that the massive turnout that people think are going to happen may not be happening. Early vote is way down, like crazy down, like 40% down. So does that mean that those people are just going to vote on election day? Well, most of them probably will, but not all of them. And so, and you have the other thing. And so early vote was of course favors Democrats 2-1. So now Democrats are going to have to do something that Republicans do just as a matter of course, which is go to the polls on election day. That's number one. And number two is that the voters who talk about voting say retrospectively that they prefer the Trump presidency to the Biden presidency by 7 or 8 points, and that the economy is the key issue, will play a role in their vote. 54% say the economy will play a role in their vote. They're not happy with the Biden economy. So QED, you just sort of follow the logic.
Right. And it occurred to me over the weekend that if Trump does win, then we shouldn't really overthink it. The economy has just been a terrible anchor on the Democrats' chances, whether the nominee was Biden or whether the nominee was Harris. The rise in prices during this administration affects lower income and middle income voters the most. It affects the battleground voters the most. And it's just almost impossible to overcome. Now, Harris has done a little bit better in closing the gap that had emerged between Biden and Trump on the economy and on inflation, but Trump is still ahead. I was struck by a few things this weekend. Obviously, all the polls are tied. As I think David Brooks was the first to say, this race started tied and it's gotten closer every week since, which is, I think, quantitatively impossible. And yet we're breaking new ground here. The Trump campaign came out with a memo yesterday evening, which I thought was pretty informative. It had a few factoids. The first is that since Labor Day, Harris has spent $241 million on trackable media. That's a 2.5 to 1 advantage over Trump. The Trump campaign spent a little bit more than $100 million in trackable media during that time. And Harris has raised, as we learned last week, $1 billion since entering the campaign in July. But to what? To what? The race hasn't moved at all. And indeed, as the NBC poll shows, John, Harris has become less popular over time. When she entered the race in the end of July, the joy explosion occurred. Her favorable ratings went up 9 points. Her disapproval rating went down some 15 points. And that gave us the tied race. But in recent weeks since the debate, she's become less popular, and her favorable ratings are on par with Trump's.
Almost exactly Trump. So look,
Right.
the NBC News poll has her unfavorable at 49 and her favorable at 43. And Trump's unfavorable is 51 and his favorable is 43. So we have said that Trump has a ceiling,
yes,
because of his favorability number. That is that goes in tandem. He has never gotten, he is actually now more popular than he has ever been. I'm looking at a chart here. January 21 to the present, he was at about 40% in January 21. He is now at 43. He went as low as 32, 31, has gotten back up. She was, when she became, when her favorability rating went up and crossed her unfavorability rating, that was in July. That didn't get to 50, according to NBC. Got up to about 49, didn't get to 50. I think what that money was spent on was maybe obliterating what might have been a Trump landslide against Biden. I mean, if you sort of look at all this, and we were all saying it was a jump ball, that had the switcheroo not happened, all these things that are now weighing her down, would have weighed him down, and he would have had his particular liabilities. And she has liabilities too, which we should go into.
But this is something that, again, this is the advantage Trump has of having been president before. This is the one thing it does for him, which is that normally in a presidential election, you don't know what the guy is going to do, what the challenger is going to do about the economy. He's making promises. He or she is making promises about what they'll do to fix things. Trump has the unique advantage of having that presidency. And as you mentioned, voters say, well, I liked his presidency better than I like the current presidency. And that comparison is where it's not really, you don't have to take it on faith that somebody knows how to deal with the economy or something. You have that direct comparison.
I think that's
and that's
right.
not something she can, she can't erase that.
But I also think it's a problem. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's a problem for voters because they're so retrospective. They're not paying very close attention to what Trump is saying about what he will do if he's president. Right. And so,
lucky
these 10 to 20% tariffs, that's not actually what happened during his first term. Right. The tariffs were a little bit more strategic, right? The mass deportations, right? We're all thinking, well, that didn't really happen last time, but it could happen this time. And then on the foreign policy scene with Putin and NATO and Ukraine, we're thinking, oh, well, Trump, it was peace and Putin didn't do anything last time, but are we really sure what's going to happen next time? No. So I agree with you, Seth, but it's just occurred to me in recent days that maybe we should spend a little bit more time thinking about what Trump will do rather than what he did.
Because he's actually being very explicit about what he wants to do, unlike Harris. And some of it is very chilling. I mean, he is. And by the way, one of the great, we talk about persuasion and nobody can persuade. One of the great persuasion stories of the last decade is revealed in these polls, which is that now more than 50% of Americans support the mass deportation of illegals. That, I don't know if that question was ever really asked in that way, say in 2012 or 2013.
Well, but I'm sure. And now everyone wants the wall, too.
But remember, the wall wasn't about deportation, right? The wall was about keeping people, making it harder for people to come in or stopping people from coming in. That is a huge alteration in the way Americans think about immigration. I know it's illegal immigration we're talking about here, and these are crimes. And so you ask people, should crimes be prosecuted? And they're saying yes. Still, of all the issues on which we have had controversial debates for the last decade, this one has gone entirely in the direction of the right. And I don't know that anything has actually gone entirely in the direction of the left, with the possible with
Well,
the possibility
abortion.
of abortion. But I mean, abortion only moved because policy altered, right? I mean, it's like
Well,
in
so did
theory,
immigration.
right? Well, that's true, right?
I
That's
mean, it's
okay,
the millions and millions of people who have entered the
right,
country since Biden became president that's forced the
right,
change in the issue. Wouldn't you say?
right.
And this and
Yeah,
this also answer. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say I'm not sure that it's Trump that did the persuading here. I mean, he certainly did some of it.
No, Biden did the
but
persuading.
yeah, sort of negatively, yeah. But I also just wanted to add there's another factor here that looks good for Trump. It's a kind of meta factor, which is that when the polls get this wrong, not immigration, but the numbers about the race, they tend to be wrong overwhelmingly in one direction, and that's that they underestimate support for Trump.
So can I say something on that? Because right now, a lot of Democrats are telling a story that goes something like this. Sure, the polls missed support for Trump in 2016 and 2020, but the polls in 2022 missed support for Democrats. And while everyone was expecting the red wave to arrive on shore on election night 2 years ago, it turned out to be the red trickle. And I think there's something to that. I was certainly among those who believed that the Republican victory in 2022 would be much more definitive than it turned out. And Nate Cohn, the pollster and polling analysis at the New York Times, he's had this chart that he puts in almost every column now where he says, look, this is where the race stands according to our polling averages. And here's what the race would look like if the polling miss is equivalent to 2022 or 2020. And if the polling miss is equivalent to 2022, then Harris has a narrow victory. If the polling miss is equivalent to 2020, Trump will win in a landslide. He'll win every single battleground state. There are a couple things to say about this. The first is it's sort of an apples and orange comparison, right? Because 2022 was a midterm election where Trump was not on the ballot. Now, Trump, of course, was an issue in the campaign, but he was not on the ballot. And so we know that Trump attracts a certain type of voter that is loyal simply to him and won't come out even for a Republican he endorses. The other thing to say about it is the polling averages in the run-up to the 2022 election seem to have been skewed by a flurry of Republican or conservative-leaning polls at the very end, which showed Republican overperformance and had contrary results to what the major public polls, such as the NBC poll we've been discussing, showed. That variance is not the case in 2024. All the polls are basically showing the same thing. In fact, a poll commissioned by the Senate Leadership Fund, kind of the Republican campaign arm in Senate races, came out with polls that were kind of bad for Trump and the Republicans just yesterday. Yeah. And I just want to zero in on one statistic, which I think is interesting. In 2022, even as I was saying to myself and publicly that the Republicans were going to have a good night, when I saw the last set of polls showing Republican Senate candidates behind among independents, I said, oh, well, that's not a good sign. And indeed, Republicans did not do well among independent voters in 2022, and that's why they did so poorly. This time, Trump is ahead among independents. According to the Trump campaign memo I cited earlier, he's ahead by 5 among independents, and I think that margin grows depending on the battleground states. And so I always watch those independent voters. Right now, they are swinging toward Trump for the first time since 2016. And if that holds, then the type of polling miss that Democrats are coping with right now, that won't show up for them on Election Day.
Here's the problem with comparing the 2022 results with the 2024 results. 2022 was a very high turnout for a midterm election. But the turnout was 52%. The turnout in 2020 was close to 70%. So these are two different electorates. And what is the difference between 2022 and 2024? Trump and Harris are at the top of the ticket. And so you are going to have, by definition, in all kinds of places, you are going to have a higher Republican turnout than you did in places where Trump may not win, by the way. I mean, states where he won't win, but states where people basically just didn't turn out at all because there was nothing for them to vote for. And so it's very hard to compare these apples and oranges. It's true that previous elections are harbingers of things to come. 2018 was also a landslide for Democrats, and did suggest that the activated Democratic electorate, activated by Trump's surprise victory in 2016, was a very potent force, and that it was going to, as they say, drag themselves over broken glass to vote, to express their view that they were unhappy with the direction of the country with Trump at the top of the ticket, and they would do that in midterm elections as a substitute for voting against Trump, and then voted against Trump in 2020 as well. And of course, Biden did better than Hillary did. He actually got over 50% of the vote. Hillary did not, although there was a third and fourth party candidate that ate up 7% of the vote or something between, in 2016. That was not really the case in 2020. So we still can't know the composition of the electorate, but we know one other little potent detail, which is that Republican people claiming to be Republican or Democrat nationally in these polls, at least one of them, people are saying they're Republican.
Yeah, the Gallup survey of party ID. Right. This is the first time in more than 2 decades that there are more people saying I'm a Republican than saying I'm a Democrat. That's kind of count for something, and it means that even a 5-point margin for Trump among independents would carry the day, because there are just more Republicans in the electorate. And if he's winning 90% of them, and then he has +5 among independents, that's pretty good. That's a winning coalition.
Yeah, so all the hopium that Democrats have had is being taken away from them by the fact that people are coming home. That is to say, there was this hope that 20% of Republicans voted against Trump or voted for Haley in the primaries, and maybe those people would vote for Harris. But according to these latest polls, the same number of Republicans as Democrats say they are going to vote for the top of the ticket. It's 93% of Democrats say they'll vote for Harris. 93% are going to vote for Trump.
And the hopium was in part built on Democrats coming home, right? After the candidate swap, Democrats came home too. There were a lot of people unsure about Biden, or at least telling pollsters, I don't like this guy. He won't step aside or whatever. And so in part, the hopium was first just Democrats coming home, and then Republicans coming home. This is kind of the natural order of things.
Right. But in other words, they had this idea that Trump's a unique threat. Democracy is on the ballot. And a lot of more Republicans didn't like Trump than the Trump Republican Party wants to admit. He should have had 90% of the vote, and he got 80% of the vote. And so maybe those people will stay home, or they'll cross the aisle. That apparently is not going to happen, or at least you really shouldn't be betting that it's going to happen. And also, very seriously competitive Senate races boost Republican turnout, because while Republicans may or may not want to vote for Trump, they may want to vote for the Republican in a race that a Republican can win for Senate. And there are weird places where that is the case, like Michigan,
Wisconsin,
where Mike Rogers is running a very serious race against. I'm sorry, who is he?
Well, he's Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan.
Alyssa Slotkin, right, who is not an incumbent.
Baldwin in Wisconsin.
Right, and Hovde running against the incumbent Baldwin is like, those numbers are very surprising. I mean, I don't think that was on anybody's radar. And so those are states where if Republicans turn out for the ballot, they're going to be like, all right, fine, I'm voting for Trump anyway. That down ballot thing could boost Trump in a weird way, just as Trump's presence at the top of the ticket can boost Hovde and Rogers.
And the best evidence that that Republicans are coming home and that all that is happening is that, and the democracy, the threat to democracy argument isn't working, is what you mentioned before about Republican self-identification hitting a 2-decade high. Republicans are they're not embarrassed to say I'm a Republican. With Trump at the top of the ticket in Trump's party. That, you know, the gain in self-ID is a sign that the party is going to coalesce behind him.
As of tomorrow, there will be 21 days left. So there is still a lot of time. And going back to the previous election, the midterm election, the apples in our apples and orange comparison, I continue to believe that the attack on Paul Pelosi in the days right before election day hurt Republicans. I think the sense that things were spinning out of control, political violence. Obviously, he was the assailant was not a Trump supporter. He was a mentally insane person. But it was a bad look, you know, and it was the vibes were bad. And something similar, of course, happened in 2018 as well, when you had the mail bomber sending the packages to CNN, and of course, also the attack on the Tree of Life synagogue. The sense of disorder and out of control, I think, does not help Trump, and so something like that again could push this slightly toward Harris's direction so that she could win.
Unless the disorder is, I mean,
you're about to say my second point.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Conversely, if there is a war between China and Taiwan, China having extremely serious military exercises around Taiwan in the past 24 hours, or if the chaos in the Middle East continues and there's another attack on Israel, or there's another brutal murder of Jews in the Middle East, there are ways in which the chaos could help Trump. The sense of the disordered world, I think, has helped Trump. And, it's funny to compare the way that these two candidates are behaving. Harris on the stump over the weekend wanted to talk about Trump's health records and how Trump isn't doing 60 Minutes. Harris accused Trump of hiding. Meanwhile, Trump was holding a rally in Coachella. Like he's having a rock concert venue. So she's all about Trump, right? But the Trump campaign and the Republicans, what are they talking about? They're talking about fracking. They're talking about electric vehicles. They're talking about the border. They're talking about crime. And again, that sense of social disorder within American cities. And they're talking about trans issues. And if there's one ad that I see over and over and over again, it's the ad run by the Trump PAC, I think, saying, quoting Kamala Harris, her own words, saying that she would be providing taxpayer-subsidized transgender care for prison inmates during her 2020 campaign. And apparently the Wall Street Journal has an editorial today as well talking about how votes cast by Democratic candidates defending men and women's sports are becoming a huge issue on the campaign trail. So you have the Democrats running a personality-based campaign against Trump. Trump is awful. Trump's a threat to democracy. MAGA's extremist. And you have Republicans actually running an issues campaign on a broad spectrum of topics. And I have to think that kind of helps the Republicans because people know what they think about Trump.
Now, you did not actually go where I was going to go with my point, which is that if the disorder continues to be that there are people in America who want to assassinate Trump,
right?
That is going to help Trump. And somebody was arrested at Coachella on Saturday night with guns and stuff. He says, I'm a performance artist. That's why I was there with guns, whatever the hell that means. But I mean, this is now an active issue. The Secret Service has had to redouble its efforts. There have been 2 assassination attempts on him. And, that's also something where 3 weeks is an eternity. There is a race on Long Island, and I want to talk about the race on Long Island for a minute, a congressional race, one of those races where somebody won unexpectedly in 2022 with the poor performance of Kathy Hochul, the gubernatorial candidate on the Democratic side, and the surprisingly strong performance of Lee Zeldin on the Republican side, Zeldin almost winning, coming within 3 or 4 points. a victory in a state, the gubernatorial race, where Democrats generally win by 15 or 20 points. And I think it was 4 or 5, I can't remember which, congressional districts went Republican, and thus accounted for the margin of Republican victory in the House in 2023. And one of those guys is a guy named Mike D'Esposito, and he is running against somebody named Laura Gillen. And the anti-D'Esposito ads are all abortion. They're abortion, abortion, abortion. He's going to take away your abortions. Abortion, 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 abortion. And then he drove drunk, or he was drunk, or he may have had a mistress. I mean, there's other. It's, in New York, you cannot not see these ads everywhere. But then Gillen started advertising 4 days ago, and you know what her ads are about? She is going to shut down that border. She is shutting down that border. And let me tell she is tough on the border. Who? I mean, if there were a migrant, undocumented worker right in front of her, she would strangle them with her bare hands. And why is she doing that? Because they have a huge amount of money. They're doing a lot of polling and focus groups in that district, and she is going to lose on the border on Long Island. We're not talking about Texas or Arizona.
I thought you were going to say Gillen's ads were D'Esposito is very clearly a Sephardic Jewish name.
It could be, and apparently, but you are obliged to pronounce it D'Esposito, apparently. So, but this is very striking, because these ads were just totally generic Democratic, get out the vote ads on Democratic issues, and suddenly, she's going to have a rifle, and she's going to be shooting at people who are running away from her by the last week in October if her numbers don't improve. That shows the bite that these issues, national issues, are having in local elections. And the Democrats are ceding everything but abortion. That's what's striking. The Vibes campaign, the Trump campaign, is the substantive campaign. Now, I don't like a lot of the substance, and it's dangerous to have a substantive campaign because it gives your opponent opportunities to say what Harris has said, for example, about tariffs, right? She says Trump is going to raise your taxes by $4,000 a year. That's how she is attacking the tariffs, because tariffs is a popular word, apparently. So she doesn't want to say his tariffs are bad. Also, because then he says, well, if they're so bad, why didn't you lift them? The ones that I placed on China in particular, and on steel. If you think they're so terrible, why did your administration keep them? But it's dangerous. You're a Republican. You also want to run Vibes campaigns. Like, everybody wants to run Vibes campaigns so you don't get attacked on your issues. But no, that's not the case. He is saying he's going to do this on tariffs. He's going to do this on this. He's going to do this on that. He's going to do this on the other thing. And she's cackling and then saying this demented thing about Trump hiding and like having health problems, when she still hasn't answered what she knew about Biden's infirmity. Like, she is, if they were to debate each other, they could spend 20 minutes yelling at each other about who's sick. And she still hasn't said a word about when she knew that Biden couldn't be the presidential candidate anymore. I'm sorry.
No, this gets to something interesting that I think has sort of unfolded most recently in the past 2 weeks. The narrowing of the already narrow race is not just a matter of people coming home. It is that the Harris-Walz ticket was not actually, in the end, able to sustain its campaign to hide the two candidates, to evade questions about Kamala's change in policy direction, was not able to surf through the country on Vibes. It actually went a little too long, and even this little mini flurry of friendly interviews that she's done, I mean, and they're like they've been like campaign ads, have been terrible for her. And I also want to say, I think the vice presidential debate might have actually, in the end, all told, moved the needle a little bit. Not even just that the night in and of itself, but the clips that were making the rounds on social media over the weekend. These were all clips that I saw of J.D. Vance really articulating the Republican view of immigration and what he terms pro-family ideas and policies, sitting down with New York Times reporters, sitting down on network news shows, really doing an excellent job.
I was going to say this, that I think that J.D. Vance has achieved neutrality. He's achieved do no harm. I think he's basically, he's been so good on the Sunday shows, on the political shows lately, and the stories that come out about this, they get passed around and reported on, and I think it's reached now a wide enough audience that sees that he's not this cartoon character, and I think that he's now, the thing with a VP is, all right, if this guy keels over, who's his VP takes over, is that a dangerous situation? And I think JD Vance has finally achieved, no, it's fine. He's not, it's not dangerous to vote for these guys because of the vice president. I don't think much goes beyond that. You don't vote for the vice president. But I agree with Abe. I do think that you just have to get back to zero, basically, and the do no harm standard. And I think he's been so good that voters are just not nervous about him being in that position.
It may be a little better than that because, the problem with Harris is that she doesn't have an antagonist, right? She attacks Trump, but he's not going to debate her. And she doesn't have anybody to argue with. And Vance went on with Martha Raddatz on This Week and got into an argument that was unbelievably successful for him. Now, there are arguments he's gotten in, like with Kristen Welker, about whether or not Biden won the 2020 election, that are probably not that great for Republicans, or at least don't help, let's say. But Martha Raddatz wanted to talk to him about this question about whether or not the Venezuelan gangs were taking over housing projects, and said they've only taken over a few housing projects. And then he said, "Are you listening to yourself?
Yeah. Martha, do you hear yourself? Yeah.
Do you hear yourself?" And so Vance, like Trump, has a ready-made target. Like, it's not just that he's shouting out into the ether about how bad Harris and Walz are. The media are their stand-ins, and he can argue with them and advance the points that he wants to make. If Trump were more articulate, let's say, and didn't believe that everybody could see into his brain and understand the associations he was making when he talked about these things, he could do that too, though he's mostly doing friendly interviews. Vance is doing the hostile interrogatory interviews, and he's knocking them out of the park. And again, I say this in a way because, when it comes to the major issues that many that I care about, and particularly Ukraine, like, I think he's a dangerous force, but you can't argue with what he is up to.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly when you compare it with Walz was interviewed by Michael Strahan last week. Michael Strahan, former NFL player, and Strahan asked him, Walz, about his comments in a fundraiser advocating the abolition of the Electoral College, and Walz couldn't have a straight answer to Michael Strahan, who did a great job, but he doesn't have the reputation of Mike Wallace, say. And then after that, Walz went on his pheasant hunt over the weekend, and it was kind of comic. And he in his camo, and apparently he had a little trouble loading the rifle at one point. And it was such an abject pander. I came across this headline this morning from Bloomberg. This is an actual headline. Quote, "Tim Walz's masculinity is terrifying to Republicans." To which I say, indeed it is. but not for the reason you think, Bloomberg.
I mean, this effort, that's something else. Now, this was not the Harris campaign. It wasn't the Harris-Walz campaign. It wasn't the Democratic Party. So just to be fair, but there was this ad that was produced by a writer for Jimmy Kimmel, in which the writer for Jimmy Kimmel casts 5 or 6 actors who are supposed to look like ZZ Top or Chris Stapleton, or Luke Combs, right? They're supposed to look like country singers with big beards sitting on a tractor.
It was the Democratic version of So God Made a Farmer.
Right. So, and they're like, I'm a man, and there are many kinds of masculinity, as far as I'm concerned. You're like, why? What is, and this, it's like Martha Raddatz. It's like, what is wrong with you people? Do you not understand that the country is not with you?
No, they don't.
They don't.
This is what we see from all the data is white liberals are now far beyond any other group. I mean, this is the FT had another piece confirming this, that white liberals are far more left-wing than any ethnic or racial minorities in the United States. They're like a universe unto themselves, and that's where we get ads like that.
Right. So that
and the media. So I would just say that the media is going to be the Harris-Walz vanguard as things look dicier as we approach this election. At 2 New York Times stories, as I went through the papers over the weekend. The first was about Elon Musk's support for Trump. And the headline in the New York Times described Elon Musk as a, quote, frenzied billionaire helps Trump. The frenzied billionaire. Now, as I was reading the story about the frenzied billionaire, one of the frenzied billionaire's rockets came down from space, descended from space, and landed by these 2 robotic arms completely intact. One of the most incredible feats of engineering in the history of the human race. But he's a frenzied billionaire. Then I turned the pages, and there was an article in the Times on how Trump supporters are preparing for a potential victory. The illustration the Times used for this article on Trump supporters was of a white supremacist march in some town in the Midwest a couple of years ago. And so the frenzy is actually going to be on the part of the media and Harris surrogates.
It's happening
getting closer to this election, and it seems like she's not quite sealing the deal, and it's already out of control.
And the point is that they are constantly having their priors reinforced, pushing their buttons, and they're unable not to take the bait. So the Bob Woodward book comes out tomorrow, and the Bob Woodward book is a way for them to reassert the argument that Trump is some kind of an agent of Vladimir Putin. This is not a good argument for them to be making. It is not helpful to them. It pushes it helps it. Nobody who cares about this hasn't already decided that they are going to vote for Harris. And they're going to talk about it for 2 weeks. And then Trump's going to say, I wasn't charged. And he will reinforce his own base and maybe get some more people to go, why are they still talking about this? Why are they talking about this? It's still the case that eggs are $3 more expensive than they were 2 years ago. They haven't come down yet. So I don't know. All they want to talk about is this nonsense with Trump and Russia. And they can't get out of their own way to see clearly into what it is that they need to say just to get those 50,000 people in Pennsylvania they need, and those 40,000 people in Wisconsin they need, and those 60,000 people in Michigan they need to reestablish the blue wall and make it impossible or very close to impossible for Trump to win. But they can't help themselves. I mean, it's like a laser. It's like a cat. It's like a cat and a laser light. Like they can't help themselves. I watched Morning Joe. I was up very early this morning. I watched the first half hour of Morning Joe, and dear God, I mean, it's like I stopped watching Fox years ago because I couldn't take the propaganda. But it's like her joy was back. By the way, I just want you to know her joy is back.
It's bad.
Because of the speech where she said, "Why is Trump hiding?" And it's like, okay, you people are crazy. The political problem in this election about hiding still resounds to the vice president's weakness, not to Trump's. Nobody thinks Trump is hiding. Nobody.
And the vice president's weakness is in part the fact that Tim Walz has been put into hiding. The vice president's vice president has been, so to speak, has been put into hiding because of the conflicts with the campaign, because the campaign is worried about him. I don't know. Some say they're worried about him outshining Kamala.
They're terrified of his masculinity.
They're terrified of his Yes, the non-toxic masculinity. But he's been put away. So, the hiding thing is also immediately recognizable. You turn on the TV and you see J.D. Vance. And if you go to, the Coachella, hey, this candidate's, basically headlining Coachella, and this guy and his VP is on TV. And the other ones are, one of the owners or founders of Time Magazine complaining on Twitter that Kamala won't sit for an interview, despite the fact that Trump sat for an interview for as long as they wanted. And Biden sat for an interview for as long as they wanted. Why won't Kamala sit down with us and talk to the people? So the stories are actually Kamala is hiding, and Kamala is hiding Tim Walz. And that's what's actually breaking through, because what you see when you turn on the TV, right, and it's not them.
So the interesting thing that we should move on. But the interesting thing to speculate about is when in the late spring, beginning of the summer, when the debate happened and Biden cratered and it was clear he had to get out of the race. But before that, when people were already talking, it turns out, about maybe he should be gotten out of the race inside Democratic circles, from what I'm told, or from what I hear, and maybe I'm wrong, who knows, Nancy Pelosi did not like Joe Biden. Did not think that Kamala Harris should be the nominee. It wasn't just that she thought that Biden needed to go. It was that somebody else should probably be the nominee other than Kamala Harris, like, say, Josh Shapiro, something like that. And that she outflanked them or outfoxed them when all this happened.
Yeah.
Maybe that was delusional on their part. But if this is the case, that, we've heard for 3 years that she wasn't up to the job and the Biden people thought she wasn't up to the job and all of that, she's proving that. She may win this election, but if she wins this election, she'll win this election because Trump could not win the third go round, not because she's winning, because of one thing we can be sure, she is not winning. He may lose, but she is not winning. And I think that is what has come home to Democrats in the last 4 or 5 days, not only just because of the polls, but because of everything that is built up here. And panic is starting to set in. I mean, we haven't quite seen it yet. We started seeing Biden panic, after the debate. We're never going to see it at that level. Money's still there. She's still tied, all of that. But of course, Biden was only 2 points down when he had to get out of the race also. So I don't know. Anyway, we should move on, because more important than any of this is, of course, we are standing on the precipice of a major event of some sort in the Middle East between Israel and Iran that has yet to emerge. What Israel's response is going to be to the Iranian ballistic missile firing. And yet again, of course, the U.S. government is being psychotic in its response to what's going on. On the one hand, now saying that Israel has to not only feed everybody in northern Gaza, everybody in northern Gaza, by the way, now being basically northern Gaza being mostly unpopulated, so therefore it would have to feed Hamas fighters, which is really great. I'm glad Kamala Harris is so concerned about their diet. But also, we have to feed people in Lebanon. We have to feed Lebanese, and we have to feed this. We have to feed that one. We have to feed the other one. And so obviously Israel's bad because it's somehow making it harder for people to eat. And yet, on the other hand, we are sending this gigantic and very serious anti-ballistic missile battery system, the THAAD system, to Israel with Americans on the ground to run the THAAD system because they're the only ones who can do it. So we will now
have an
actually have
alternative.
American. Okay.
I have an alternative course to the deployment of THAAD. And that is, we could assist Israel in its retaliation, its offensive retaliation against Iran. And indeed, we could have used this moment to strike the Iranian nuclear program with our ally Israel and end all of this. The only way this ends is when the Iranian regime is no longer in power. That will deny the money and the support and the elan to the proxies, and it will create a new situation in the Middle East, one that will be safer for America and for Israel. Instead, it seems that the administration is trying to buy off Israel by deploying the THAAD system and Americans in Israel, which is a rarity to send our troops there. And I think I don't think it's the right move at all.
Right.
And I mean, it's not the right move at all. And there's some other things that former Israeli ambassador Michael Oren suggests that we could do that would actually be meaningful. One would be the U.S. could endorse the plan to declare the northern part of the Gaza Strip closed and then begin a process of trading space within that closed territory for hostages. The American president could commit, Ambassador Oren suggests, to military intervention against Iran once Iran enriches uranium to more than 60%. Or, Oren says, the United States could sell Israel the long-range strategic bombers that could drop the bunker buster bombs from heights that are outside the Iranian air defense system. We're not doing that. Instead, we're saying, hey, we'll help you defend yourselves from these missiles when no defense, not even THAAD, which is an incredible system, no defense is 100% secure.
Not just that, but you can make the argument that it invites, right? The combination of will help you only defensively,
totally.
And then after the missiles saying to Israel, take the win, don't hit back.
Yeah, and as we speak, there are sirens in Israel. We see on social media.
Look, there was a successful strike on Haifa this weekend.
Right.
70 people were injured in a drone strike, a Hezbollah drone strike. The interception rate is staggering. I mean, it really is staggering. And it's so good, the Israeli interception rate of the incoming rocketry and drones and stuff like that, that they know enough to know when they don't even have to fire Iron Dome at an incoming missile, because they can follow the trajectory and say it's going to land in a field. We don't have to waste an Iron Dome missile on this. We can preserve it. But that drone strike evaded the early warning system. So somehow Hezbollah revealed a capability that Israel may or may not have known that it had. I mean, it may have known it had it and didn't really know what to do about it. If you can't have an early warning, you can't have an early warning except to evacuate Israel's third largest city, which is not exactly a serious way of dealing with the matter. The Hezbollah is heating up. Israel, ground it down and did unbelievable damage to it, but it's not gone yet. And every time Israel does something in Lebanon, you've got the UN saying you're putting our troops in danger, which is hilarious because the UN troops in Lebanon are there to prevent Hezbollah from being there. That's why they were deployed to southern Lebanon. UNIFIL was deployed there to prevent the occupation of southern Lebanon by enemies of Israel. And instead, of course, not only aren't they there to do that, probably half of them are now being paid off by Hezbollah to be effectively part of Hezbollah's force.
Yeah. I think I've told this story in our private chats, but not on the podcast. But that when I years ago, when I was the editor of a Jewish newspaper in 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, and it became known that UNIFIL had broadcast Israeli troop movements and reinforcements on its website during the war. It had broadcast sensitive Israeli troop information, and this, and it caused the whole controversy. The UN was denying. I called somebody in Kofi Annan's office. Kofi Annan was the Secretary General. And I said, well, can I just ask UNIFIL? And he said, sure. Here's the mobile number to the commander on the UNIFIL commander on the ground. So I called the UNIFIL commander on the ground and I said, he was aware of all the controversy. Obviously, he's the UNIFIL commander on the ground. And he said, yeah, we did. He tried to justify it different ways, but he had admitted on the record of what he was being accused of. And the thing that was crazy for me about the whole story, and that just pushed it further, was the idea that everyone involved in the UN structure was so sure that whatever they did could not possibly be bad. In other words, they had a right to do whatever they want. The UNIFIL commander on the ground picked up his cell phone and a reporter called from a Jewish paper and said, well, did you do it or not? And he's like, yes, let me tell you why or whatever. But I got that number from Kofi Annan's office. They said, yeah, go ahead. Ask him. Nobody. And then, of course, the coda to that, by the way, was that I found myself somewhat blacklisted from the UN press list after that until the end of Kofi Annan's time in office, as if I had leaked secret documents or done something like that, when in fact I had called Kofi Annan's office, gotten the commander on the ground's phone number from them.
Amazing.
So this idea is so embedded in their minds in UNIFIL and in general UN peacekeeping units that they can do anything, and by definition, it is not wrong.
Look, what do we know? We know that Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the UN, is just an open antagonist of Israel and pretty clearly an anti-Semite. I mean, his statements about Israel's rights are statements he would make about no other country on earth. We have a famous UN rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, who is an open, not only hater of Israel, but somebody who is accusing the Jewish people worldwide of a kind of conspiracy to destroy the Palestinian people and all of that. These are two major figures in the UN, and we are. So of course Israel simply has to ignore it. So what does Israel do? It says, "Hey, UNIFIL, move. Okay, we're coming. We're giving you notice. We don't want to hurt you. Move. Take all your shit." Get back, go north of the Litani River before we come in. And then UNIFIL goes, but they're attacking us. I mean, it is a kind of, I don't know. It's not gaslighting. I don't even know what you call it. It's like the chutzpah definition. It's like you kill your parents and you throw yourself on the mercy of the court, claiming to be an orphan. I mean, this is a pretty astonishing thing. Anyway, we don't know what's going to happen. I think people really thought that probably Israel was going to have moved by now. The fact that it hasn't moved by now shows how difficult the decision making is in relation to this, and what capabilities they have or don't have, what might be exposed, what might not be exposed. And yeah, I mean, with 3 weeks to go in the election, a major conflagration could break out in the Middle East. Ordinarily, I would say that redounds to the benefit of the incumbent administration, because people don't. I mean, ordinarily, if there is worldwide disorder, you would say there's a rally around the flag effect, right? Although that usually maybe involves attacking Americans, but whatever. Harris has made it clear that she, has a Glock, but that's about it in terms of what she has to say about anything relating to worldwide defense, is that she has a Glock, which I don't think anyone has ever actually seen. So maybe she can go pheasant hunting with the Glock with Tim Walz.
Now that I would have watched.
That
would have been worthy of watching. All right. Well,
wasn't that a Kerry thing? Didn't John Kerry do something like that to try to?
He went hunting too.
Yeah,
but he. They
already have the camo hats.
We know that Kerry knew how to use a gun. a gun, to be fair. Like Kerry used the gun in Vietnam, so Kerry didn't have to prove his vote of freedom. That wasn't his problem. Anyway, okay, so we will close up shop for the day and be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.